So good evening and welcome all, and a special welcome to our guest today, Hindol Sengupta, who is, as you all know, is a journalist, writer, and entrepreneur. He lives in Delhi and is currently editor-at-large at Fortune India. In 2015, his seminal book on India's underbelly of entrepreneurship, Recasting India, was shortlisted for one of the world's most renowned prizes in economic writing, the Hayek Book Prize, given by the Manhattan Institute. He became the youngest writer ever at 34 to be nominated for the Hayek Prize and the first ever from India. Sengupta graduated with a master's degree in mass communication from the Jamia Millia Islamia University in Delhi. He holds a first-class Bachelor of Honors degree in journalism from Delhi University, where he was ranked first in journalism at his college, the Delhi College of Arts and Commerce. Hindol was born in Jamshedpur and grew up in Kolkata, where he studied science at the Assembly of God Church School and founded the school's first Shakespearean Dramatic Society. He was selected by one of the country's oldest newspapers, The Statesman, as a student columnist while still in high school, and was the first student of AG Church to achieve this. So with this short but stunning list of achievements, Hindol, welcome to this Q&A session courtesy the Advait Academy. And we are here to talk about your latest book, which happens to be your sixth book, Being Hindu, Old Faith, New World, and You, which is somewhat of a change from your previous 5 books. And let me begin with the first question as to who is the intended audience of your book, Hindol? Is it the Hindu, the NRI, the Hindu atheist, the foreigner, the budding scholar, the foreign correspondent who never stirs out of Delhi, the child who's learning about Hinduism at school? Who is, in your mind, the intended audience of your book when you set about writing it?
First, thanks very much, Abhinav. It's really interesting to hear about the Shakespearean Society I started in school after so many years today in this Zoom session with Advait Academy. Thanks very much for having me. To answer your question, essentially, I wrote a book because I really felt, as I looked around me in India, that while we keep quoting the statistic that 80% of this country is Hindu, actually, in reality, very few people know anything about Hinduism. So what we are having is an extremely polemical conversation, but we are essentially two sides screaming at each other often, and none of the sides know much about Hinduism. One classic example, which I mention again and again in my book, is Swami Vivekananda, one of the tallest figures in contemporary Hinduism, one of the last great seers of Hinduism. And yet, for all the talk about him, apart from a few quotations that have become posters and literally cliches, very little is understood or known about what Swami Vivekananda, for instance, really stood for and said in his life. So I wrote this book called Being Hindu, and especially if you look at the subtitle which you mentioned, Old Faith, New World, and You, the critical part there is you, all of us, essentially. What does this faith really mean to us? Because for 5,000 years, we keep talking about our civilizational values, but in reality, in 2015, very few of us really understand what those civilizational values really stand for.
Excellent. I think which sort of, what you answered about the fact that so few people know about Hinduism in India, I think leads me to my next question, which is that in many ways, you would agree that your book has a topicality given the recent spate of controversies over so-called incidents of intolerance and the sort of accompanying media manufactured hysteria that we have been witnessing for the past several months. Do you think your book could help address some of the questions that have arisen consequently in the media and in general?
Absolutely, I would certainly hope so. Let me address a couple of key factoids and news points here first. Number one, let's take the intolerance debate. I have been saying again and again, I am all for people. Number one, I condemn every act of violence. That's number one. Number two, I absolutely admire and respect anybody wanting to protest any act of violence, no matter who commits it and who it is committed upon. Number three, if we really want justice for violence being committed, we should therefore ask, for instance, let's take the Dadri case. For all, I respect people wanting to, return awards and wanting to protest against violence. They are perfectly justified in wanting to do so. But what bemuses me is that so few people who were protesting actually even demanded a an FIR on, people who actually committed that violence. In fact, at the moment, we are seeing this extremely curious thing where even the victim family is saying they don't actually want to pursue the case anymore. So in this hilarious incident and almost, a farcical incident, a man is dead and nobody seems to actually want justice. Everybody seems to just want to posture. That I object to, and I think is very silly. If we truly want justice, then we must ensure that we will have a system where we actually ensure justice for those who have been killed. And if we don't ensure that, then there is a problem. The other thing that I'm really sort of irritated about, in a sense, is that we really have to get a sense in our country of where we really stand on many critical issues. There's a lot of misunderstandings about what Hinduism stands for, because the very few people know anything about Hinduism. Very few people know anything about the traditions of Hinduism. For instance, we are doing this webinar on a day when the RSS, for instance, has said, even in Arunachal Pradesh, if somebody eats beef, and this was tweeted out from the RSS official Twitter ID, even if somebody eats beef, the idea that they cannot be a larger part of the nationalist goals of this nation and be a true nationalist is not true. So, I mean, we are almost talking at cross purposes continuously. I think many clarifications are required. A lot more knowledge is required. The problem is, in the entire discourse about Hinduism, there are two illiterate sides screaming at each other. The problem is, when we grew up, we know very little about ancient India. We know very little about our traditions, our culture. We are not taught any of these things. And because we're not taught any of these things, we have a very flawed understanding of where we stand.
I would completely agree with you. It's like two sides. They are shouting at each other rather than talking with each other, and that is unfortunately the level of discourse. In some ways, I wanted to ask you, where in your very first chapter, How to Write About Hindus, you actually talk about, you dwell on this topic of what is the kind of writing that has emerged, that has been more or less the de facto from the West in talking about India and specifically about Hinduism, where you say that it's in my mind, I found it a brilliant and biting take on, as well as takedown of the typical writing that we see that abounds in the West on Hinduism, which is obsessed with the Kama Sutra, the Linga, Ganesha's trunk, and much more and much worse. So my question is, and I have two questions here. The first one is that, is this writing the result of simple ignorance, or is this something that is more deep-rooted, a sort of call it Orientalism and racism at its worst? And the second question is, and I think more importantly, why do you think this goes unchallenged and unaddressed by American academia and media from which this emerges in the first place?
So, I mean, it's a long answer because the reasons for this are very complicated. Let's take them one by one very quickly. Number one, this Freudian analysis of viewing faith and traditions of faith through a Freudian prism is not applicable today in any faith largely around the world, apart from Hinduism. Hinduism is the last bastion where this sort of Freudian analysis of faith and tradition is actually being passed off as scholarship. No other faith, whether it's Islam or Christianity or Judaism, actually does this anymore. Remember, Freud actually wrote a book targeting Judaism at one point in his late career, using Freudian analysis to look at Judaism, but those texts and that text is entirely discredited. It is only Hinduism which does not have at the moment the intellectual prowess in some senses to fight back against this sort of Freudian analysis. And of course, a lot of this Freudian analysis is plain mischievous, maybe sometimes even malicious. Now, having said that, the other point is, to come to your point about why aren't more people talking about it? Look, I have often said that one of the big problems is we have had an extreme left heavy-handedness throughout our academia. That sort of strain in our academia in India, the white man's burden in a sense, if you will, essentially means that we have always been taught from our childhood to look at all Hindu traditions with a wary eye. Either we think of them as something primitive, as something, old, exploitative, dirty even. We are essentially very uncomfortable with the Hindu part of our heritage. And that's because we know and understand so little about it. I'll give you an example. Very few people, millions of Hindus say the Gayatri Mantra every day. But very few people actually realize that it's one of the most sublime, and I mentioned this in my book, it's one of the most sublime prayers in the world, because the Gayatri Mantra, what is it asking for? It's not asking for blessings. It's not asking for material, benefits from God. It's not asking for, protection from God. It is asking for intelligence through which to look at the world. What a sublime message that is. But you tell me, when you grew up, or when we grew up in school and college in India, who teaches us all of this? Nobody does. And I'm not saying don't question Hindu tradition. Of course you should. I, for instance, deeply question caste. And I've said again and again in many, many, interviews and meetings that I've done, that I, in fact, reject. I never took the sacred thread ever. And because I reject any sort of label that comes only via birth. I believe anything that can come to me only via birth is inherently discriminatory. So I believe that we should question tradition. But having said that, we don't know anything, or we don't know most things about our tradition as far as Hinduism is concerned, or most people don't. And therefore, there's a lot of, misunderstanding, which leaves scope for this sort of Freudian analysis to continue, which I think sometimes is, as I said, mischievous, if not malicious.
Absolutely. When you talked about caste, I was reminded of this, of what you have written with respect to caste, that not in terms of reformers, not just Vivekananda, if you take even Mahatma Gandhi, who had this to say in a letter to Dr. Ambedkar, who was another of the great reformers of Hinduism, that caste has, and I quote, "Caste has nothing to do with religion. It is a custom whose origin I do not know and do not need to know for the satisfaction of my spiritual hunger. But I do know that it is harmful both to spiritual and national growth." And
yeah, no, you're absolutely right. Look, the point is this. The greatest, and I say this again and again, look at the foundational hymn, if you will, of Hinduism, the Nasadya Sukta. What is the Nasadya Sukta saying? It's saying you should question even the existence of God. One of the great benefits of Hinduism, which most religions don't have, and Buddhism is the other religion that has it, is that it constantly urges you to question. It is when Hinduism becomes codified and rigid, that's when all the exploitation begins. But if we go back to the roots of the faith and we understand the roots of the faith, it urges us to question. And if you question, what is Gandhiji saying? Even if something exploitative is written in a text, reject that text. You have the freedom, we have the freedom in Hinduism to reject texts which we feel are incompatible to our modern times, to our lives, which we feel are exploitative. There is nothing binds us to a text. But my only argument is, in order to accept or reject a text, we must first analyze, read, and understand the text. Because if we just try to, reject or critically analyze something that we don't even understand, then that's not very beneficial. I want to make a very strong point here, if you will allow me just a moment. Look, it's always said in our country and in my experience, I've always said, and I've always seen, that people who reject caste always define themselves either as atheists or as Marxists or as communists. I want to make this distinction. I am a proud practicing Hindu. I am not only a proud Hindu, I am also a practicing Hindu. And it is because I'm a proud and practicing Hindu that I denounce and reject the exploitative parts of caste. I believe, like Gandhiji believed, that he believed in secularism and pluralism because he was a true Hindu. I believe that my rejection of caste comes from the fact that of my learning, of my understanding of my own faith. It is because I genuinely have tried to understand the Vedanta, I have tried to understand the foundational texts of Hinduism, that I have the intellectual ability to reject the exploitative parts of caste. I am not a Marxist, I am not a communist, I am not an atheist. I'm a proud and practicing Hindu, and as a proud and practicing Hindu, I entirely reject the exploitative parts of caste. I reject my caste identity, so to speak. But that does not in any shape or form take away from the fact that I'm a proud and practicing Hindu.
I couldn't be happier, Hindol. The fact that it is possible to separate one's identity as a Hindu from the association that people automatically make with caste. And this is one of the things that not only Mahatma Gandhi, but if we go back about half a century or more before that, we come to perhaps one of the greatest reformers that Hinduism has seen, at least in the last half a millennium or more, Swami Vivekananda, who said, as part of his effort to reform Hinduism, that being a Hindu, and you quote from his Vivekananda, who said that Hinduism or being Hindu could not be about discussing for years whether we should drink a glass of water with the right hand or the left, whether the hand should be washed 3 times or 4 times, whether we should gargle 5 or 6 times. And this is the state that Hinduism found itself, from which Swami Vivekananda was able to pull it out and into modernity. But I wanted to touch upon or move our conversation to a slightly related but a slightly different topic, which is when you talk about reform, then apart from Vivekananda and other reformers in Hindu, you take the example of Dara Shukho, who in 1956 got together scholars from Hinduism and Islam at Kashi. And this is something that not many of us know about. And Dara Shukho, as we know, was one of the sons of the 5th Mughal Emperor Shah Jahan. And he gathered at Kashi a vast troop of bilingual scholars, you write, to try and find harmony between the Holy Quran and the Upanishads. And this is an idea that would probably sound as radical today as it was when it was first attempted then. And so I wanted to ask and have you share with our viewers today how what Dara Shukho did then was different from what Akbar had tried 3 generations earlier. Was Dara's effort a continuation of Akbar's efforts? And the second question in this area is slightly more provocative. As an exercise in conjecture, could you share your perspective on what if Dara had become the Mughal emperor instead of Aurangzeb?
Let me just go back in time, since you mentioned Dara Shukho. Couple of things, but before that, let me just say, I am delighted and I support the move to remove Aurangzeb's name from a road in central Delhi. It has been named after APJ Abdul Kalam now, which is a good thing. I would ideally have named it under the name of Dara Shukho. It is to the entire tragedy of India that we prefer to remember Aurangzeb and try to defend him, who I don't think deserves to be defended at all, but we have maliciously forgotten Dara Shukho. Now, remember, Dara Shukho is a very interesting example. Here is a Mughal prince who's trying to bring together these 2 great traditions, Islam and Hinduism. And what does he get for it? Let us not forget what he gets for it. This is a man who's finally, of course, captured by his brother and essentially murdered. But there is a nuance here. Why is he and how is he murdered? He's murdered because it's not easy for one Mughal prince to instantly kill another, especially since it's the same bloodline and they are brothers, right? But, Dara Shukho is murdered under the pretext of having been an infidel or an apostate or a heretic by taking the help of extreme hardliners among the mullahs, so to speak, to prove that he's an apostate and a heretic, and that's how he can be murdered. This is the tragic story of Dara Shukho, a man who tried to bring about real synthesis between Islam and Hinduism, and is finally proved an infidel and a heretic and murdered. I believe that's a turning point in the history of Islam and Hinduism in this country. Had Dara Shikoh been, if he had become emperor instead of Aurangzeb, the history of India would have been different. It is indeed true that many of the experiments that Akbar tried, Dara Shikoh was in some senses, the proper inheritor of those experiments. And I believe that had he become emperor, a true synthesis of some kinds, which began in some parts of Mughal history in India, would actually go to their proper fruition, and a proper synthesis would have happened between Islam and Hinduism. Let me go further. Since you're asking a question of history that can, of course, neither be proved or disproved, let me go further. I believe if Dara Shikoh actually would have become emperor instead of Aurangzeb, if he would have inherited the Mughal throne, there would have been no blood-soaked partition of the subcontinent many hundreds of years later. Dara Shikoh failing to be emperor finally resulted in a domino effect to the point where, in the name of faith, the subcontinent was divided. I don't think it would have happened. We would have brought together a synthesis that even Gandhiji wanted so desperately. And it's a tragedy for India that this didn't happen. And to go to your other question, look, the point about India is, and this is something that we need to remember, the point about India is that we have very selectively picked up, because of our distorted academia, selectively picked up figures to either deify or to relegate into the dustbin of history, so to speak. And it's because we have used such poisonous prisms often in this sort of process that we have come to this sort of polemical point that we are at today. We don't have to have this sort of illiterate polemical debate. We need to be taught better about our traditions. We need to realize who our real heroes are, and we can move away from this polemical debate. That's the big message of my book.
Fascinating that you consider Dara Shikoh as more of the true inheritor of Akbar's legacy that Akbar had begun. And while you say that yes, things can neither be proven or disproven, but it is still a fascinating conjecture that what if Dara Shikoh had become the emperor? Would we have had or not had the partition, which was in every sense of the word a tragic event? And you write about the fact that, and you have spoken about the fact that we are not, our history has been so distorted by the left historians in this country. And I will quote from your book where you write that it would be useful, of course, if we accept the facts to start with. There is little doubt that Hindu civilization went through hundreds of years of repeated invasion, barbaric assault, mass destruction of Hindu religious places, end quote. So who should accept these facts, Hindol? It is not as if these facts are hidden. They have been in the public domain for as long as the events themselves that they talk about. And yet we find that self-styled intellectuals in this country are not only in denial about these facts, but they are quick to condemn anyone raising these facts as fascist, intolerant, communal, and worse. So my question is that how do you go about getting people to accept these facts, and what next?
Well, a simple thing is we need to openly talk about these things much more. Please understand, only a couple of days ago, the first ever launch of Being Hindu, which happened in Dehradun, was with a Harvard-trained Muslim lawyer, where we actually had a wonderful, and who told me how much she loved the book, because we were having an open, proper conversation instead of the skewed polemical conversation that we have. And she told me how, for instance, this idea of shrines in Islam, right? It's not in any other part of the world apart from our part of the world, right? Arabia suddenly doesn't have this idea of shrines, the dargahs. So this Muslim lawyer who was launching my book in Dehradun told me that for instance, in her home state of Kerala, one of her ancestors was a Sufi saint. So there's a shrine, a dargah, mazar to one of her ancestors, right? And we had an extremely open conversation. Look, we can have an open conversation when we accept a few things. and accept in academia, in public discourse, and not shy away from it. Yes, we had centuries of invasions, but equally, we have to accept the contributions of people like Dara Shikoh, later on people like Wajid Ali Shah. Tell me today, Kathak. What is Kathak without the contribution of Lucknow? Right? I mean, what is Kathak without the contribution, without this synthesis, this coming together of cultures? So we have to take things, the good things for what they are, and also face up to the bad things that they are. I mean, are we going to not accept the great contributions in music and culture of Islam to this country, and deny all of that, but just because we want to sort of have this strange political correct or polemical conversation? Or on the flip side, are we not going to say Aurangzeb is a tyrant just because we want to have this politically correct conversation? So I'm saying, let's accept that Aurangzeb was a tyrant, but let's also accept that Dara Shikoh gave up his life to try and bring together the synthesis of Islam and Hinduism. Let's accept that many people believe that Tipu Sultan was a tyrant, but let's also accept that there would be no Kathak without the synthesis of two cultures, Hinduism and Islam. Let's accept what the country really has to offer us, and let's not be trapped in polemics or political correctness.
Absolutely, couldn't agree more. But then again, to use a cliched phrase, you're probably preaching to the choir. But what after this book, Hindol? It is probably too early yet, given that the book launches.
The book has just come out. Yeah, it's just been barely a week or so. The book has come out.
But so far, is there any topic you cover? Because writing this book would have taken a long time, several months. So, is there any topic that you have found so far that you have covered in this book, but that which you would want to maybe do a follow up or talk about more, or write or do something more detailed on?
Yeah, I'll tell you what I'm trying to work on now. I'm trying to explore this idea of modernism in the Hindu tradition, because I fundamentally believe that, look, I mean, in my book, for instance, since you've read it, there was a journalist in India who defined this phrase called the Internet Hindu as a derogatory phrase, right?
Yes, of course.
I don't want to go into details of that, but I reinvent the phrase in my book. I have a chapter called the Internet Hindu, right? And there I explain in great detail, using example after example of technology and science, why the Hindu tradition is actually best fit for our internet age, for our digital age. Why the Internet Hindu is in some senses the future. Because it's a tradition, it's a faith which does not hold you, which does not restrict you at all. Look, there is a reason why at CERN, one of the great nuclear laboratories in the world, in Europe, there is actually a huge statue of the dancing Shiva, the Nataraj. Because in quantum physics, they believe that the Nataraj exemplifies the principles of quantum physics the best, right? And therefore, I argue powerfully in my chapter on the Internet Hindu that far from being a derogatory phrase, actually the Internet Hindu is a philosophy that perfectly suits, or Hinduism is a philosophy that perfectly suits our internet age. So that's detailed in this book. Now I'm moving forward from that in my next book and trying to explore this, why Hinduism is an eminently modern faith, why our philosophies are essentially always have been modern. Of course, they had many problems. Sometimes they were, codified and made rigid and all sorts of other issues, exploitation. But if you go back to the basic principles, if you go back to the real principles, we are essentially one of the most modern traditions in the world. So I'm exploring this interaction between Hinduism and modernism in my future work.
Oh, fascinating. I think that's something for all of us to look forward to, even as we read your latest book, Being Hindu. You talk about Hinduism as eminently suited to the modern age, and you quote extensively from Vivekananda and great historians like R.C. Majumdar. But do you have any suggestions?
Well, sorry to interrupt you, but my book, as somebody pointed out, my book quotes many, many more Nobel laureates in science and mathematics than it does, quote unquote, Babas or Sadhus. You know,
Oh,
I wrote a
absolutely.
book called Being Hindu, but it quotes because I wanted to get away from this trap of regressiveness and this label. And I show in my book that actually it's far easier to depict Hindu traditions via Nobel laureates and what they found in Hinduism than just mere quote unquote religion.
Oh, absolutely. You I would suggest that people read the book to see for themselves the amalgamation of modern science with the oldest religion in the world. I wanted to ask you, is do you have any suggested reading for people who want to seek and explore more about Hinduism after reading your book, or if there are
Yeah.
facets of Hinduism that they want to explore?
Yeah.
Do you want to suggest, given that you read so much as part of your preparation for writing your book, do you have any suggested readings for people?
Yeah. So, two things I want to recommend very strongly. One, read the 9 volumes of the writings of Vivekananda.
9 volumes.
Please go read Vivekananda. There are 9 volumes of it. I'm not saying you have to read every word of those 9 volumes, but go and read him as much as you can. That's number one. Number two, everybody talks about the Bhagavad Gita, but let me give you another sort of suggested reading. Please read something called the Ashtavakra Gita,
Oh,
which
yes.
is really, in some senses, the ultimate medicine. Because, the Bhagavad Gita still is kind. It tries to break the truth softly and gently to you. The Ashtavakra Gita is like a hammer. It falls on all your deceptions and all our insecurities like a hammer. It breaks all of that in one go. Please, if you have the courage, go and face up to the Ashtavakra Gita. It'll make you a different individual. That's my suggestion. So these are my 2 suggestions. Read Vivekananda, read the Ashtavakra Gita.
Absolutely perfect. So for people who are wondering about it, the Ashtavakra Gita is in some versions a part of the Mahabharata itself, and the Chinmay Mission Press has an edition of the Ashtavakra Gitas. If you're so interested, it's a small book. I think if while imbibing it might well take a lifetime, but you can certainly read it over a leisurely weekend. And with this, we come to the end of the Q&A session that we had planned. What I wanted to do before I open this up for Q&A to people, if they want to send in their questions either through chat, or if they have any questions, they can unmute their mics and ask. And obviously, Twitter and social media remains, always open as a medium for people to engage and interact with you. As people will know that you, Hindol, are on Twitter with your handle being Hindol Sengupta. And a review of your book, Being Hindu, has now also come out on indiafacts.org. So I would encourage people to take a look at it and decide on their own, make up their minds about the book and then go ahead and read it. So I will now open this up for Q&A. If people have questions, you can unmute your mic and ask those questions to Hindol. If you want to send them via chat, you can do so. We will keep the line open for a few more minutes.
Hi, this is Shanti.
Hello,
Hi.
Shanti.
Hi. So it was great listening to you, and I have some small comment to make. So many of late have said that serious studies in Sanskrit and Hinduism are coming from West, especially US, and rightfully so. But there are serious scholars in India in the 6 systems of philosophy, and who can really guide us in this discourse.
Yeah.
But lack of English knowledge seems to be a big barrier in this communication. Do you agree? If so, what do you think needs to be done to bridge this gap? Because there is so much in vernacular, so much written in vernaculars that people don't even know. We only know about what is translated, and people who know Sanskrit do know the originals, but there is so much written in other vernaculars of India, serious scholarship that can really guide us. I mean, what can be done in this age? English is it sometimes becomes a barrier in communication, lack of English knowledge. So what is your take on this?
Since we were discussing the Mahabharata before this, let me give you an example. In the Battle of Mahabharata, finally, even the warriors had to ask for specific weapons from the gods to fight the battle, right? You will agree? That even to kill certain people, specific weapons had to be asked from the gods, including Shiva. Without using those specific weapons, the battle could not be won. You would agree?
Yeah.
Ghatotkacha was killed by one specific weapon, right? Right?
Yeah.
Think of English like that. I'm not saying that there isn't enough scholarship. There's enormous scholarship in India. But we have to distill all of that. I'll give you one example. One man I read in the last 4 or 5 years while writing this book was a man called M.M. Gopinath Kaviraj, right? The great Sanskritist, right? Who reads his work these days? Why? Because the scholarship exists, but it has to be brought into the modern idiom, the modern discourse. And there we can learn from what is happening in Islam. After 9/11, there was a concentrated effort by scholars around the world in Islam to simplify and give Islam a modern idiom and present its quote-unquote good virtues around the world. And successfully, a lot of that has been done. Now, we should learn from that and say, look, at the end of the day, it's not about the language. English is just a tool. You have a huge young population. You need a modern idiom to translate, to explain many of those concepts and theories. There are more people who are going to go and pick up my book because it's written more simply, young people, than who would go and dig up Jonathan Guneri and M.M. Gopinath Kaviraj. This does not mean I'm an insect compared to M.M. Gopinath Kaviraj, and so I'm not even an insect. Maybe I'm a grain of dust at his feet. But that's not the point. I'm saying there has to be interlocutors, there has to be interfaces who will take all this knowledge and give some of the starting points, an access point. So the access point has to be provided. The moment we get trapped into this English versus not English debate, I just think it's futile. At the end of the day, English is a global language. What are you going to do about it? No matter how much we like or dislike it, at the end of the day, that's the language most people use. So we have to take that weapon and fight it to our advantage.
Now, do you think enough is happening in taking?
Of course, enough is not happening, madam. Of course, enough is not. If enough was happening, would you even be listening to me? You wouldn't care, right? Because enough is not happening, then there's a role for people like me. Of course, enough is not happening. Much more needs to happen.
Right. Okay. Thank you.
Thank you, Shanti. Thank you. That was a wonderful question, and thanks, Hindol. I think we now know at least some more people to read up on in the vernaculars, if we can. Any other questions, people?
There are a couple of questions I saw on chat or something, but I'm on an iPad, so I couldn't really open them. But if you can see them, maybe you could read them out to me.
Sure, I will read out one, which is from a Global Gypsy, and he asks, would Hindol push for a TV show where he invites one scholar from Hinduism and another from another non-dharmic religion and discuss about the ways to soften the polarization and misunderstanding between faiths among the Indian population? A TV episode today has a far wider reach than taking the message and truth about the past through classes and textbooks.
Well, I completely agree, but I hope somebody listening to this would sponsor such a TV show, If somebody is willing to sponsor it, we should do it. Look, I'm already trying to do my bit. There is a reason why I chose to have my first ever launch as a Hindu-Muslim dialogue of a book called Being Hindu. Look, there is no point. Please understand my point of view. There is no point in us just talking to each other, right? It's speaking to the converted. We have to go out there and speak to other faiths. We have to go out there and speak to other people who don't agree. Our real victory is only when people who don't agree with us at least are willing to listen to us. Just by talking to each other, we are an echoing chamber.
Absolutely.
So I really believe if more interfaith dialogue or, inter points of view dialogue, so to speak, can happen, it's a very good thing. So if anybody listening to this is willing to sort of put together a platform, I am delighted to sit together and have conversations with people from other faiths, people, people who don't agree with our point of view, and have a conversation with them.
Well, I certainly hope that, even if people are not on this live session, if once we post it out on the net, people watch this, and in 2016 we'll all look forward to a TV show with Hindol hosting it. I had one person on chat with the handle HCC asking, "Sir, can I ask?" And yes, of course. Please go ahead and ask a question. You will need to unmute your line, but you can go ahead and ask a question. Okay, anyone else? If not,
his question is posted on the chat, actually.
Would you like to read it out?
Oh, it says, but sir, I read the book and it's amazing, but you did not touch elaborately on the caste system based on birth, which is flawed and not the real caste system. It's only negativity against our religion. What is your solution to end today's wrong caste system? That was his question.
Okay, it came in.
Very simple solution. I mean, I elaborate, and I said this in the conversation today also, and I've said it on other platforms also. Look, you can call it, I mean, there are a lot of these debates, oh, but actually caste was this, actually caste was that, oh, but the Varna, oh, but this and that. All that is fine. I accept all those nuances. At the end of the day, millions of people in this country today feel that they have been wronged and exploited via caste. From my understanding and from my, reading and from my intellectual sort of abilities, I believe anything that comes to us purely on the basis of birth is not something that I accept. So I'm a very proud Hindu, but I don't accept this kind of discrimination, and therefore I don't care about caste. It's okay, people might want to keep their caste, but I don't care to know. I don't mention my caste anywhere. I don't claim any special privileges but because of that caste. And I certainly don't care about what other people's castes are. These things don't matter to me. I reject all these things. So that's my point of view. I'm not saying you have to do what I do, but I can only tell you what I do.
Excellent. I would only add to this is that in the Mahabharata, it is Yudhishthir in response to a question says, the question is, what determines caste? And Yudhishthir's answer is, it is conduct alone that determines caste. So, in whatever form or manner caste is seen today, it was certainly not based on birth.
Sure, fair enough.
One more question from HPPCC, and I'm okay. This is a provocative one. I'll read it out. It says
something about Rajiv Malhotra.
Yes, so I'll read it out in any case, Hindol. I'll leave it to you to answer, defer or not.
Sorry.
Do you agree with Rajiv Malhotra's views that there is a targeted silent war against Hindu systems through Western scholars and Indologists? You did touch upon this in somewhat, no, not directly in one of your earlier responses, but
so I mean, I think that the same gentleman is objecting to you saying why is it provocative and so on and so forth, right?
It's a different person, but nonetheless.
Okay. Why is it provocative? Look, the point is this. Now we can keep discussing till the cows come home, literally the cows come home, whether there is a silent attack, a vocal attack, left attack, communist attack, whatever attack. The point is there is a problem. And I would go back and say the problem is we ourselves don't know enough about our own faith. Okay. Now, sure, there might be an attack, there might not be an attack, there are institutional biases, all of that exists. Now, I mean, we all know that there is a problem, right? I mean, what's the point of discussing this problem again and again? Let's find a solution. Let's read up more. Let's understand more. I just saw a comment that Amish is pointing out in the Gita, the nuances of Varna and the system in caste and so on and so forth. I mean, my friend Amish and Sanjeev Sanyal, who's another person whose writing I really enjoy. I mean, people like Amish and Sanjeev Sanyal and Vamsi Juluri, they're doing wonderful work. And somebody like me draws inspiration from all of them, right? And from whatever it's worth, I'm making a humble contribution myself. There should be, why only 4 of us? There should be 4,000 of us, 5,000 of us. Let us all understand, read, write more, engage more. I think constantly saying that, oh, look, I mean, there's an institutional bias. Yes, all of that exists. We all know that. We know there's a problem. We know there is an attack. We know all of that. I mean, look, I mean, I'm 35. I am interested in solutions, right? I mean, you can keep telling me about problems all your life, and I know the problems exist. Let's try and find solutions, guys. I mean, that's my only, humble request.
Excellent, Hindol. I think we are all on the track to finding solutions, and I think your book is one contribution towards that effect in reclaiming the space on Hindus and writing about Hindus that has been appropriated for one reason or the other by the West. And I think to that end in itself, that book is a valuable contribution.
Here's my point. With all the angst, my book is now going to be published in America, right? I mean, next year, my book has been bought in America. It's going to be published in America. I mean, hopefully I would have made that tiny contribution to the conversation, right? And I'm not saying it's a big deal or anything, but the point is we all have to try and look, at the end of the day, if there is negativity, let's try and counter it with positivity. Let's try and counter it with facts. Let's try and counter it with real arguments. Because beyond that, I mean, angsting about it is useful, but beyond that, beyond a particular point, angsting doesn't help. Let's try to put our own points of views, and let's do something about it.
Perfect. So on that positive, hopeful note, I will bring today's session to an end. First of all,
somebody has just said, sir, I gifted your books to 5 of my friends. I just want to publicly say thank you very much. You're very kind. I'm very grateful for your help.
I'm sure you are, Hindol. And again, I'll say, first of all, thank you for doing this session. This is wonderful. We will be posting this up.
May I just come in, please?
It available? Yes, please go on.
Chitra here.
Hi, Chitra. Hi, Chitra.
I am in the process of reading your book. So in the prologue, I ran into something which I thought I should mention to you.
Yeah.
So you say one would think that a faith that accepted all religions and expressions of faith as equally valid 1,700 years ago.
Yeah.
Would be the most studied and treasured in a world of sectarian religious strife.
Yes.
But what do you mean by 1,700 years? I mean, why 1,700?
Look, I mean, this question of dates, right? I mean, we can, there are multiple. That's not just one source, right? 1,700 is one source of one dates on, some of the texts go back to, or some people believe that some of the texts go back to. I have a larger point. Fine, whether it's 1,700 years, whether it's X number of years, whether it's 2,000 years, 5,000 years, whatever the number of years is, the point is it's undeniable that the pluralism and the questioning attitude of Hinduism is extremely old. And because it's extremely old and has survived so many onslaughts for so many years, at the end of the day, one would think today, at a time of extreme religious strife around the world, that this sort of questioning, accommodative attitude would be treasured. If not, I mean, let's even take away the word treasured. At least more and more people would try and understand it, read it, analyze it, and see what it stands for. And I don't think enough of that is happening. That's my larger point. So whether it's 1,700...
I completely get, and I completely agree with. I mean, there is no contest to it at all. I just wanted to know if you meant 1,700 years before Christ or just 1,700 years from now?
No, before Christ.
That is missing in that.
So fair enough. I mean, I will go and check. I mean, but like I said, I mean, numbers... Yeah, so I mean, and it entirely depends on which text, right? So I mean, you can pick up one text and say, okay, well, some historians say that this text was written at this point, but you'll equally find other historians who will say, no, but I don't think this is dated correctly. This actually should be dated somewhere else. So there's a lot of conflicting opinion in all of this. And my point there is not so much the date. My point there is the philosophy.
I get that. I just thought our plurality went way long back.
Yeah, no, absolutely. It's just a text. I mean, depending on who wants to take what text. And that's the great thing, right? I mean, sure, I have taken one sort of marker point, right? And you're free to take whichever marker point. Of course, our plurality goes back much further. So we can take whatever marker points we want.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you for this session too.
Bye. Thank you, Chitra. So, again, I'll conclude now this session by saying that the book is Being Hindu. It is available as an ebook as well as in bookstores. You can follow and you can ask if more questions to Hindol on Twitter, social media. His Twitter handle is Hindol Sengupta, and we will put up a recording of today's webinar on YouTube or some other place and also publish the links. Thank you all for attending, and Hindol, a big thank you again from all of us.
Thank you very much.
Bye.
Bye.